My name's Maya, I'm 37, and last Saturday night, my own family made me serve drinks at their fancy party. As if I was hired help. I thought that was the lowest point of my life, until one unexpected guest, a Pentagon official, looked me in the eye and said, "Ma'am." That moment changed everything I thought I knew about respect, family, and myself. Tell me where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe for more real stories about family, courage, and second chances. I almost didn't go that night. The invitation had been sitting on my counter for 2 weeks, unopened, its gold-embossed letters staring back at me every time I walked by. The Davis family 40th anniversary celebration. It wasn't really an invitation, it was a reminder. A reminder of everything I wasn't anymore. I'm Maya Davis, 37 years old. A registered nurse, or at least I was until the hospital downsized my department. These days I pick up shifts at an urgent care center across town. Pays the bills barely. My husband, Mark, used to say money doesn't matter when you love what you do. But he's been gone 4 years now, taken in a car accident that happened so fast I never even got to say goodbye. The night of the party I was sitting on my couch, eating cereal straight from the box, the TV humming in the background. I told myself I didn't owe them anything. My parents, my cousins, all those people who looked at me with polite pity and whispered things they thought I couldn't hear. But my phone lit up with my mother's name before I could make peace with my decision. "Are you coming, honey?" her voice asked, already tired, already disappointed. "Everyone will be here. You know how your father gets when people ask where you are." That line. You know how your father gets. It had been the same since childhood. Go along. Don't make waves. Be the quiet one. "I don't know, Mom," I said softly, trying to sound casual. "It's been a long week." She sighed. "Maya, you can't keep hiding. It's family." Family. That word used to mean something comforting. Now it just meant a room full of people pretending not to judge me. I stared at the clock. 6:47 p.m. The party started at 7. My hair was unwashed, my dress still in the closet, and my heart nowhere near ready for small talk and champagne. But guilt is powerful, especially the kind that comes wrapped in your mother's voice. So I stood up, set the cereal aside, and told myself I'd stay an hour, just long enough to make an appearance, smile, and slip out before anyone really noticed. Getting ready felt like a memory from another life. I ironed my navy blue dress, the one I'd worn to job interviews and funerals. Funny how those two occasions need the same kind of courage. I brushed my hair until it lay flat, dabbed on a bit of mascara, and caught my reflection in the mirror. For a second I saw the old me, the one who used to walk into a room full of people and feel like she belonged. Then I blinked and she was gone. I whispered, "You'll be fine," to no one but my reflection. The sound of my own voice surprised me. When I stepped outside, the evening air felt thick. The sky was that strange mix of orange and purple that always makes you feel like something's ending. I slid into my old Honda, the one that rattles when it idles, and started the drive across town. Halfway there I almost turned around. My chest felt tight, my palms damp against the steering wheel. What was I even doing? Why was I driving into a place that had never felt like home? But I didn't turn around. Something, maybe stubbornness, maybe the faint hope that this time might be different, kept me going. The venue was one of those rented banquet halls with string lights and cheap flowers that looked fancier in pictures. My parents had gone all out, of course, white tablecloths, a photo slideshow looping on a screen, the kind of event that tries too hard to look perfect. As soon as I walked in, I felt it. The stares. Not long, not mean, just that quick scan people do when they're figuring out where to place you in their mental chart of success. My cousin Amber spotted me first. She squealed like we were best friends and gave me one of those hugs that last half a second too long. "Maya, you made it. We weren't sure you would." I smiled politely. "Yeah, I wasn't sure either." She didn't even catch the tone. "Come on, everyone's dying to see you." Everyone turned out to be my family, half of whom I barely spoke to since the funeral. My father was at the head table, wearing the same navy suit he wore to every event, his laugh too loud, his eyes scanning the crowd. My mother was beside him, smiling that brittle smile she saves for public use. I waved. My father gave a quick nod, already back to talking with someone more important. I took a seat near the back, hoping to blend in. No such luck. "Maya," Aunt Linda called out from a nearby table, her voice sharp with cheerfulness. "You didn't bring anyone?" No, I said simply. Oh. She blinked, her smile thinning. Well, it's good to see you out again. That word again. Out. Like I was a ghost who had to be coaxed into daylight. The room buzzed with stories of vacations, promotions, new homes. I sipped water and tried to look interested, but my stomach churned. I could almost hear their thoughts, how different my life looked now. How I'd fallen behind. It wasn't jealousy that stung, it was being forgotten. Then came the moment that would humiliate me the most, at least that's what I thought then. The catering staff seemed short-handed. Someone dropped a tray, glasses shattered, and laughter rippled across the room. My aunt, ever the organizer, clucked her tongue. Maya, she said brightly. You're used to helping people, right? Could you give them a hand with the drinks? The words hit like a slap. I stared at her, unsure if she was joking. But her face stayed perfectly polite, perfectly unaware. Around the table I saw it, the small smirks, the shared glances. I could have said no. I should have said no. But I didn't. I stood, my heart pounding, and forced a small smile. Sure, I said softly. I can help. The catering manager looked surprised but handed me a tray without question. And just like that, I became the help at my own family's celebration. Walking between tables, I kept my chin up, pretending it didn't matter. I balanced the tray carefully, offering drinks, smiling when I had to. The laughter, the perfume, the flash of jewelry. It all blurred together. I felt small and visible. Every word, every giggle around me seemed to echo, "You're not one of us anymore." Then near the back I heard someone say my name quietly. Maya. I turned startled. A man I didn't recognize was sitting alone at a table near the corner. Tall, calm, maybe in his 40s. His suit was plain but neat, his expression kind. I nodded politely, unsure if he was another distant relative. He smiled. Thank you, ma'am. That word, ma'am, hit harder than I expected. Not because it was formal, but because it carried respect. Real respect. Something I hadn't heard in a long time. For a moment I didn't feel invisible. I felt seen. I didn't know then that the man at that table, table 7, was about to change everything. But I remember one thing clearly. That was the night I almost didn't go. And if I hadn't, I would have never known just how wrong they all were about me. I kept moving, tray in hand, because standing still felt like an admission that I belonged nowhere. The corner table's man, table 7, had said ma'am as if he meant it, and the sound threaded through the room like a foreign song. I heard it again when I passed a cluster of cousins near the floral centerpiece. They were leaning close, talking about college funds and mortgage rates. One of them, Claire, glanced up and gave that quick, polite small smile people use when they half recognize someone but decide not to engage. I told myself not to look for sympathy. That was the silent rule I'd followed for years. Don't expect rescue, don't expect applause, and never give people the satisfaction of seeing you hurt. But sympathy is a tricky thing. It sneaks in wearing the shape of a familiar face, then freezes you with the doubt that maybe you misread everything. I felt it now, small and ridiculous, and I resented myself for it. Careful, Maya, someone called as I navigated between chairs. A toddler darted by, clutching a glittery cup. The child's mother mouthed an apology, wide-eyed and distracted. I smiled, tucked an outstretched hand into a practice gesture, and kept moving. With each glass I offered, a new image of myself unfolded. To the cousins I'd once been, the one who taught algebra in high school and stayed late to help underclassmen, my life looked like a pause. To the in-laws, my name belonged to the obituary column, a distant line in a paragraph. To the younger nieces and nephews, I was the aunt who brought occasional store-bought cupcakes. None of that matched the late-night shifts at the clinic, the calls I took at 2 a.m., the hands I'd held when patients trembled with fear. Those nights had weight. Those mornings carried stories that didn't fit into polite conversation. Aunt Linda appeared as if on command, glass balanced on her manicured fingers and a smile carved for public moments. "You're doing such a good job helping," she said, voice a syrup of sweetness. "We always knew you were a caretaker." That word landed gentle and heavy. Caretaker. It placed me in a box with soft edges, safe, unthreatening, inconveniently small. I almost told her about the night I stabilized a man with a blocked airway, how the adrenaline made my fingers remember maps of veins and bone. I almost told her about the trembling soldier I'd sat with in the ER and the apology he offered in a voice rough with shame. I almost did a lot of things tonight. Instead, I nodded and let the label settle over me like a shawl too worn to look new. I kept thinking of Mark when the word stuck. He used to bristle when people dismissed nursing as small work. "People don't understand what we carry," he'd say, and his jaw would tighten as if he could hold the meaning in place. He'd tell me that caring for someone was a kind of fierce intelligence. He was right. I could read a person's breath the way other folks read headlines. That skill sharpened me, but it didn't change how family rooms like this tended to measure worth in promotions, in houses with more columns than closets, in brand names on winter boots. At the main table, a cousin I barely recognized laughed about an investment he'd made. The joke landed and everyone raised their drinks. It was a thing I saw often, success as a sound everyone learned to mimic. Around them, conversation hummed with the bright rhythms of people who didn't have to think about rent or the next medical bill. It wasn't mean. It was simply a different kind of awareness. Around tray number 3, an older man reached for a cup and steadied himself with a cane. He looked at me the way strangers sometimes do in waiting rooms, curious but kind. "You must be family," he said, his voice threadbare with friendliness. "You look like them." "Yes," I said. "I'm Maya." He asked about the slideshow looping on the screen and mentioned a mutual professor from years back. He smiled in that way older folks sometimes smile, like a light switching on at the corner of a room. For a handful of minutes the night felt ordinary. My answers were small, honest pieces that fit easily into conversation. I felt human. Then a man slid into the chair beside him, boisterous, confident, and greeted him as if they had shared decades of stories. The newcomer's gaze drifted across the room and landed on me as one might notice a painting in a foyer. Acknowledged, then catalogued. "How are you holding up?" the newcomer asked, the phrase used as much to close a subject as to check a box of social propriety. "I'm fine," I said. It was a careful answer, measured and true enough for a passing chat. I thought about telling him how the clinic had been slammed all week, about sleepless shifts and the stubborn satisfaction of seeing someone's color come back after a long fight. I thought about telling him how tired I was of being defined by absence, by the empty chair where Mark once sat. But some truths need an invitation, and he gave none. That's the thing about rooms like this, they have a current and it moves people in small ways. They drift toward comfortable topics and away from anything that might make the picture less tidy. Recipes, retirement plans, a new bakery on Main. These were the soft conversation pieces our family used to cushion awkwardness. I became a spectator to those easy patterns, watching from the margins. My cousin Chloe waved me over with an enthusiasm that felt rehearsed. "We should get a photo," she said. "You look good tonight." Her phone already held the camera angle. Their photos were rituals. Tiny monuments to a version of life that looked complete with a square of filtered light. I squeezed in, shoulders adjusting to an invented posture, and smiled. The flash popped. Click. Someone said, "Perfect." The click was a promise of nothing. Under the caption, the world would see a bright, tidy moment. No one would scroll and find the late nights, the cheap dinners eaten in silence, the way I sometimes rehearse conversations in the mirror to keep my voice steady. The photo would tell one story. The truth had a way of being inconvenient. When the tray finally clicked empty in my hands, I felt the tiny hollow of accomplishment, small and oddly fragile. I had navigated the room without collapsing. My limbs were heavy, not from the weight of glasses but from the slow pressure of being misread. The caterers thanked me with a smile and a breath of relief, as if a small crisis had quietly been averted. I told myself to settle, to let the evening carry on. Then Ellie tugged at my sleeve, her small fingers urgent and insistent. "Aunt Maya, make the balloon animals with me," she demanded, eyes wide with the kind of innocence that made me want to stop time. In the center of the clamor, her voice was a bell. I crouched and took the long skinny balloon between my fingers, twisting until a giraffe, or more accurately, something with 4 odd legs, emerged. Ellie laughed in a way that made the room soften. Her head rested against my shoulder, tiny and warm and simple. There on the floor with a child's laughter wrapping around me, I felt something like belonging. It wasn't the heady, loud belonging the party tried to manufacture. It was quieter. It didn't demand achievement or a title. Just existed. For a moment the night's pressures receded and I could breathe as if lungs remembered how. When I rose, Ellie dangling at my side, my mother's posture caught my eye. She talked to a neighbor, hand gesture soft, voice pitched for small talk, but her gaze flicked toward me now and then in the way someone checks a pet across a crowded room. She would smile. Then she would look away. There was love in the motion, yes, but also restraint. Her restraint had many reasons, pride perhaps, or old habits of not asking too much that might cause discomfort. I wanted more than her glance. I wanted an admission, I see you. I know what you do. But she had been trained in the same dances as everyone else here. And old dances are hard to change. No one had shouted insults at me. That might have been worse. The quiet omission, the way people slide around the edges of your pain rather than lean into it, cuts deeper. It's a corrosion that works slowly, eroding confidence a degree at a time until you forget the sound of your own worth. I pressed my hand to my chest, holding that familiar, quick beat, and steadied myself. I wanted to speak up, to slice through the polite fog with the blunt instrument of truth. But truth doesn't always fit between a plate of hors d'oeuvres and the next toast. So I kept walking, kept smiling, and kept listening to the small acts that still meant everything. The man at table 7 watched. He picked up his glass and gave me the faintest nod. No showy performance, no dramatic announcement, just a simple acknowledgement. It felt like someone handing you a rope when you are used to treading water. I tucked that small, quiet respect into the pocket of my evening like a talisman. A thing I could pull out later when the chill of omission crept back. The night rolled on, but for the first time in a long while, I felt a gentle steadiness under my feet. The party's current still moved, but I had found a small place to stand. He was still there. Table 7. The man who'd nodded at me earlier now sat with both elbows on the white linen, fingers laced loosely, studying the room as if he were cataloging it for meaning. Something about the way he watched, not intrusively but with quiet focus, made the noise around him fade. His composure didn't belong to this place of nervous laughter and half-forced smiles. It was steadier, like the air that settles just before rain. When I passed again with an empty tray, his gaze lifted. Not the sharp kind that dissects, but the gentle recognition of someone who sees a person instead of a role. The eye contact lasted less than 2 seconds, yet it left a trace like a hand pressed against cool glass. "Would you sit?" he asked, gesturing toward the empty chair across from him. His tone wasn't commanding, more like an invitation offered to even the smallest fragment of courage I had left. I hesitated. Around us, the room was shifting into dessert mode. Plates clinking, laughter rising, waiters circling like bees around spilled sugar. I wasn't supposed to sit. I was supposed to move, invisible, efficient, polite. But something about the quiet weight of his request made obedience to those unspoken rules feel irrelevant. "I shouldn't," I said, glancing toward the kitchen archway. "I'm just helping." He smiled slightly. "You've been helping all night." He pushed a chair back an inch. 5 minutes. No one will notice. I sat. The chair felt colder than I expected, or maybe that was my pulse reminding me I hadn't truly stopped moving since the evening began. For a heartbeat, neither of us spoke. The hum of conversation filled the gap, wrapping the table like static. "You work in healthcare," he said, not asked. "Your hands give it away." I blinked. "How can you tell?" He tilted his head, eyes tracing, not rudely, just observantly. "Steady grip. Nails trimmed close. Small callus here." He pointed vaguely toward his own thumb. "People who hold fragile things for a living. Patients, instruments, hope they move differently." The words felt heavier than casual observation. I found myself breathing slower. "You're very perceptive." He gave a quiet chuckle. "Old habit. Comes with my job." "What do you do?" I asked. He paused, as if measuring how much truth the moment deserved. "I oversee medical logistics for the Department of Defense. Technically, that means I make sure field hospitals get what they need before they know they need it." I almost laughed. "That's not small work." "Neither is yours," he said quickly, and his tone wasn't flattery, it was fact. "That's what most people forget." Something in my throat tightened. For the first time that evening, my name didn't feel like a footnote. "I read your name on the place cards," he added softly. "Maya." "Yes," I said, surprised he'd noticed. "Mark's wife, right?" The sound of my late husband's name struck like a bell, pure, unexpected. My eyes flicked up sharply. "You knew him?" He nodded once, slow. "Not personally, but I knew his work." Engineering team on Project Arcadia. He built frameworks we still rely on. He sipped his drink thoughtful. We lost a good one. The ache that had slept beneath my ribs stirred awake. He never thought anyone noticed, I said quietly. People notice, the man replied. Just not always in time. For a while silence was enough. Around us, laughter rose from the dance floor, where the youngest cousins were attempting something that might have been a waltz if enthusiasm counted more than rhythm. I watched them move under the flickering lights, each moment feeling oddly suspended between grief and calm. Then he spoke again. I watched you earlier. Not in a strange way, he added quickly, with a self-conscious half-smile. Just observing how people treat one another. You were doing more than serving drinks. You were steadying the room. I frowned lightly. Steadying the room? He nodded. Every table you passed, voices softened, arguments paused. You brought calm into chaos. That's not something people trained for hospitality do. That's something healers do. The statement hit me deeper than I expected. Because it was true in ways I couldn't articulate. The quiet discipline, the reflex to scan faces for distress, the instinct to soothe before I spoke, all muscle memory from years in trauma units. You remind me of someone I once served with, he continued, his voice lowering into something almost confessional. Captain Alvarez. She ran the field triage tents. In the middle of artillery fire, she'd hum. Just hum. Drove everyone crazy until we realized the sound made people breathe slower. It kept panic at bay. He glanced at me. You have that same kind of gravity. I stared at him for a long moment, unsure whether to thank him or laugh away the sudden sincerity. Compliments were rare currency in my world, especially the kind not linked to endurance or obligation. Captain Alvarez sounds like someone I would have liked, I said finally. You would have. His smile reached his eyes this time. She used to say healing isn't just about fixing what's broken. It's about reminding people they're not disposable. The sentence landed inside me like an anchor. I wanted to ask him about his service, about the scars behind his measured tone. But before I could, someone interrupted. A relative flushed with wine and nostalgia. Maya, there you are. We're taking another group photo. Her voice yanked me back to the surface. I turned toward her. In a minute, I said, too quietly to sound convincing. She blinked, unsure how to respond to resistance she hadn't expected, then drifted off with an awkward laugh. When I looked back, the man at table 7 was watching me with a quiet understanding that didn't need explanation. You don't like crowds, he observed. I don't like performances, I corrected gently. He smiled as though that made perfect sense. Tell me something, he said after a pause. If you weren't here tonight, where would you rather be? The question was simple but unsettlingly personal. Probably at the clinic, I said after thinking. There's a night shift nurse who always burns herself out trying to cover 2 wards. I'd help her. You'd rather be at work? Work makes sense, I said. Pain has rules there. Patterns I can read. He nodded thoughtfully. And here. Here, I exhaled, glancing across the tables. Pain wears sequins and smiles. He chuckled softly. That might be the most accurate thing I've heard all week. We both laughed, small but genuine, and the sound cut clean through the hum of the hall. The dessert course began arriving, plates of custard, glossy fruit, the faint scent of coffee warming at the sidebar. He didn't touch his. I noticed his hands instead, broad, a few faint scars near the knuckles. They looked like they'd held things heavier than cups. He caught me noticing and said quietly, "They're from a transport accident. Years back. Lost 2 good men." His gaze stayed steady. It's why I left fieldwork. Logistics felt safer. I hesitated, unsure if empathy would sound like pity. I'm sorry, I said softly. He shook his head. Don't be. Sometimes safety is just another word for distance. He smiled wryly. You'd know about that. The remark slipped under my skin. I looked down at the linen, tracing the pattern of light through the glass stem. Distance becomes habit, I admitted. You start to confuse it with peace. And yet you sat down, he said. That's something. For a moment I couldn't speak. His words had the quiet gravity of truth I'd avoided naming. I sat there, studying the flicker of candles reflected in his glass, and wondered how someone I'd met only an hour ago could read me more clearly than people who'd known me for years. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a folded card. Plain, off-white, edges softened from handling. "We're starting a veterans mental health unit in D.C., he said. "We need nurses who understand both medicine and loss. The kind who steady rooms." I stared at the card but didn't take it. "You don't even know if I'm qualified." He smiled, a little tilted. "I've seen enough tonight to know you are." I didn't move. The offer felt unreal, out of place in this hall of forced laughter and chandeliers. But the conviction in his voice made it sound like a doorway had cracked open, one I hadn't even realized existed. Before I could answer, someone announced a toast. Crystal clinked. Conversation swelled like a tide. The man leaned back, giving me space to think. The hall glowed in golden light, all polite celebration again. Yet my pulse was no longer syncing with the room's rhythm. I looked at the card once more. His name printed neat and simple. Colonel Daniel Reeves. The title hit me like a faint echo. I'd seen that name before. Not in person, but on an official letter months ago, one thanking me for a donation drive I'd helped organize for overseas clinics. I had read it quickly between shifts, too tired to care who'd signed it. And here he was, real, offering me a way out of invisibility disguised as small talk. "Colonel Reeves," I murmured, testing the name. He shook his head lightly. "Just Daniel tonight. Rank belongs somewhere else." The warmth in his tone disarmed me more than any flattery could. "You don't have to decide anything now," he added, sensing my hesitation. "But promise me you'll think about it. People like you, we lose too many of them to silence." I nodded slowly. "I'll think about it." He smiled, and for a second I thought he might say more. Instead, he raised his glass in a small private gesture, an unspoken toast between two people who had nothing left to prove. Then he said, almost to himself, "Sometimes the most extraordinary people are the ones a room forgets." The words lingered long after he stood to leave. I watched him walk toward the exit, measured steps, head held high, disappearing through the archway just as the laughter swelled again. The clinking glasses drowned everything else, but his sentence remained, etched against the noise. When I finally looked down, the card was still on the table, resting beside an untouched dessert. Its edges caught the candlelight, thin and sharp and trembling like possibility itself. The card sat beside my untouched dessert like a secret only I could see. Its white edge gleamed faintly under the chandelier's light, catching and releasing every flicker of gold that danced across the tablecloth. Around me, the noise had begun to swell, the kind of messy, overlapping chatter that meant someone important was about to speak. A spoon clinked gently against a glass. "All right, everyone," Uncle Richard's voice boomed, still cheerful from the third round of wine. "Before dessert gets cold, or whatever fancy people say about custard, let's do a toast." Laughter rippled through the hall. I froze. My stomach twisted, an old reflex. Toasts meant eyes. Eyes meant expectation. And expectation meant I'd have to pretend again. To smile when every muscle wanted to rest. To lift a glass as though I belonged among people who'd barely looked at me all night. I could feel Aunt Brenda's gaze dart toward me. She was the one who'd organized this family reunion, though organized was a generous word. It felt more like orchestrated control, a performance in which everyone played their assigned role. I was not the nurse, the widow, or even the woman who'd worked double shifts to pay off hospital bills. I was the helper, the woman who'd been so kind to pour drinks earlier because, as Brenda whispered to her friend, Maya doesn't mind doing things with her hands. And now, as Richard called for silence, I could sense another performance approaching, the final scene before dessert. I tried to steady my breathing, but my heart was hammering against my ribs. "Let's raise our glasses," Richard declared. "To family, to being together, to remembering where we came from, and to those we've lost." The last phrase, "those we've lost," tightened my chest. Heads bowed politely. A few murmured my husband's name. For a second I almost softened, but then Richard added, half laughing, "And let's not forget the hard-working folks who make sure everything runs smoothly tonight, especially Maya for keeping the drinks flowing." The laughter that followed was loud, good-natured to everyone but me. I could feel my face burning. Dozens of glasses turned toward me, raised in playful tribute. I smiled because that's what you do when you're being laughed with, and add in the same breath, My hand trembled as I lifted my water glass, pretending to join in. But before I could even sip, another sound cut through the noise. A single voice. Calm. Controlled. Distinct. "If I may," said a man from table 7. The air shifted. Heads turned. Conversations halted mid-laugh. Even Uncle Richard's grin faltered as the man, Colonel Daniel Reeves, stood, glass in hand. He didn't raise it high. He didn't need to. His voice carried without force, the kind of tone that silences a room because it carries purpose, not volume. "I wasn't planning to speak," he began, glancing around the table. "But I feel it's necessary to add something, to correct something actually." A flicker of confusion rippled through the crowd. I stared, frozen. "Maya," he continued, turning toward me, "you've been spoken of tonight as though your kindness is a service, as though pouring a drink is what defines you. But I met Maya tonight, not the helper, not the hostess's niece, but a woman who's given more to this country than most of us will ever understand." Every word fell like deliberate drops of water in a dry well. Richard chuckled nervously. "Oh, she's modest, Colonel." Reeves lifted a hand slightly, cutting him off with grace. "Modesty isn't silence," he said. "And silence isn't absence. Maya served hundreds of patients during the pandemic when staff were quitting faster than they could be replaced. She organized supply drives for rural clinics. She volunteered at veterans' wards without recognition, without pay. And when I said earlier that I'd seen her name before, I meant it. The Department of Defense knows it." The room went utterly still. The only sound was the faint hum of the overhead lights. He went on, calm and steady. "So when I hear a woman like her being thanked for pouring drinks, I feel compelled to remind everyone in this room who she really is. Someone whose compassion has reached further than any of these glasses tonight." My throat closed. I couldn't look at anyone. I could only stare at him, the man who had, with a few sentences, upended years of invisible servitude. "Someone, maybe Brenda," murmured. "She never told us that." "I doubt she would," Reeves said, eyes still on me. "People who do real work rarely need to." A soft laugh, half disbelief, half shame, moved through the tables. The kind that comes when truth finally pushes through pretense. He lifted his glass just slightly. "To Maya. For everything she's done. And for every moment she's been overlooked. We see you now." The silence before the first clink of crystal was unbearable. Then slowly glasses rose again, hesitant, unsure, but rising nonetheless. "To Maya," several voices echoed. I sat motionless. My pulse thudded in my ears. It was surreal. The same glasses that had just mocked me now lifted in reluctant respect. But Reeves didn't watch them. He watched me. And for the first time all night, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel like the woman who'd been asked to serve drinks because it was easier than inviting her to sit. I felt like myself again. The moment stretched and then released like a knot finally loosening. Someone began to clap. Not loud at first, but enough to spark others. The sound filled the room. Not wild applause, just soft acknowledgement. The kind people give when guilt meets admiration. Brenda tried to smooth it over with her brittle laugh. "Well, that was unexpected." Reeves smiled politely, taking his seat. Truth usually is. The rest of dessert passed in fragments. The chatter resumed, quieter this time, as though no one quite knew how to reclaim the easy arrogance that had filled the air before. I stayed seated, unsure what to do with the strange blend of gratitude and discomfort swirling inside me. A young cousin leaned over. "Aunt Maya," she whispered, "is it true? You worked in hospitals and stuff?" I nodded, smiling faintly. "Yeah, for a long time." Her eyes widened, a flicker of awe lighting her small face. "That's cool." It was the simplest word, but it filled something hollow in me. After dessert, people began to drift toward the dance floor. I sat back, watching the lights blur across the polished floor. I could feel eyes still glancing my way, each one carrying its own version of apology, curiosity, or reevaluation. For once, I didn't shrink from them. Brenda eventually approached, holding 2 glasses of wine. She offered one. "Truce," she said, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. I took it, mostly because refusing would feel too heavy. "I didn't know you'd done all that," she said, staring into her drink. "I didn't think I had to explain myself," I replied gently. She nodded, lips pressed thin. Guess we forget sometimes who people are when they stop talking about it. Her tone was genuine. It wasn't an apology exactly, but it was close enough. As she walked away, I felt something unclench in me. A slow release of years spent trying to prove worth in spaces that didn't want to see it. The music changed, a soft jazz tune, low and nostalgic. Couples began to sway. I sat quietly, thinking the night had finally leveled out. But then, just as I started to rise to leave, a man in a navy suit stepped up to the microphone near the bandstand. His badge caught the light. Pentagon insignia. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "before the night ends, I want to extend a formal acknowledgement on behalf of our department. Colonel Reeves wasn't exaggerating earlier. Maya Thompson's contributions have been documented across multiple relief programs. It's not often we get to meet the faces behind the work that keeps our systems alive." He turned toward me. My breath caught. "And if I may speak personally," he said with a small nod, "you have our deepest respect, ma'am." The word ma'am echoed louder than the room's applause. It wasn't the sound of politeness, it was recognition. Every whispered judgment, every sideways glance from the start of the evening faded under the weight of that single syllable. Ma'am. Respect. Not pity. Not obligation. I stood slowly, unsure what to do with the attention. Reeves gave me a quiet nod from his table, an almost imperceptible smile of affirmation. The applause grew, not thunderous but real. And for the first time in a very long time, I didn't wish to disappear. The card still waited where he'd left it, its edge gleaming under the warm light. I slipped it into my purse without hesitation this time, because maybe, just maybe, the toast hadn't only changed the room. It had changed something in me too. When the applause finally faded and the music resumed, I realized I was smiling, not because I'd been praised, but because I'd been seen. And that, I thought, was something worth raising a glass to. I gathered my purse, card tucked safely inside, and rose from the table, feeling a new weight in my chest. Not the familiar ache of invisibility, but something heavier and warmer. Acknowledgement. Around me, the party continued, chatter resuming in fragmented rhythms, but I moved through it differently now. Each step felt deliberate, as though the floor beneath me understood that tonight, nothing would bend my posture or my pride. Passing the dessert table, I noticed Chloe whispering to another cousin, pointing toward me with wide eyes. Their laughter had that same curious, slightly guilty edge, like children discovering a secret they weren't supposed to know. I kept walking, ignoring the sudden quiet judgment and intrigue that tried to cling to my heels. For once, I wasn't shrinking. I wasn't disappearing to make the room feel lighter. I occupied the space I had earned. Ellie, who had spent part of the evening tugging me toward balloon animals, spotted me from across the hall. Her small hand shot up, waving wildly. She ran toward me, giggling, and I crouched to catch her. "You did amazing, Aunt Maya," she said, breathless. "I saw everyone looking at you. You're like, really important." Her innocent exclamation made my chest tighten with a mix of pride and unexpected vulnerability. "Thank you, sweetie," I said, letting her little hand linger in mine. "But the important work isn't about being seen, it's about being steady, even when no one notices." She frowned slightly, as though that was a concept too big for her 7-year-old mind, and hugged me tightly. I stood, holding her small frame, and for a second felt anchored in something simple and unshakable. The idea that influence, even unrecognized, mattered. I kissed the top of her head, letting the warmth of her trust seep into me, a counterbalance to the eyes and whispers swirling through the room. I continued toward the main doors, where the evening air promised release. The smell of faint rain mixed with the scent of polished wood and candle wax, comforting in its ordinary, mundane perfection. My heels clicked lightly on the marble floor as I navigated around lingering guests. Some smiled politely, others avoided eye contact entirely, perhaps unsure how to approach me now that the truth had been spoken so publicly. Reeves was near the exit, adjusting his cufflinks, calm and composed. His gaze found mine, and the simple nod he offered carried a weight far beyond courtesy. It was a nod that said, "You are recognized. You belong. You have power beyond what anyone here has measured." I walked past him, keeping my head high, feeling the strength in each step. But even as pride filled me, the remnants of the night, the old hierarchies, the subtle dismissals, still brushed against the edges of my mind. My pulse was steady, Yet the echoes of half-whispered judgments tugged at a part of me trained to anticipate disapproval. At the door I paused. Outside, the street glimmered with wet asphalt reflecting the soft halo of streetlights. The night smelled like renewal. I breathed deeply, letting the cool air chase away the lingering tension. And then I stepped out. The moment my hand touched the doorknob, a thought struck me sharply. This night had been about more than recognition. It had been about claiming my own narrative in a room that had long written it for me. All those years of being polite, helpful, or quietly accommodating had not defined my worth, they had only obscured it. Tonight, someone had finally illuminated the truth. The walk to my car was slow and deliberate. My reflection shimmered on the wet pavement, distorted but undeniable. I caught glimpses of myself. A woman who had carried grief, responsibility, and invisible labor all at once. A woman who had poured herself into others' lives without fanfare and emerged tonight with a new unspoken authority. As I opened the car door, I noticed the condensation on the window fogging under my touch. I drew a small, shaky breath, tracing a line in the mist. For a moment, I let myself feel the enormity of the evening. The dismissal, the laughter, the toast, and finally the recognition. It was an emotional gradient I had not anticipated. A combination of shame, relief, and fierce pride that made my heart ache in the most satisfying way. Sliding into the driver's seat, I rested my hands on the steering wheel, feeling its cool texture beneath my palms. I thought of Reeves again, the steady way he had addressed me. His words hadn't just been a gesture. They were a mirror, reflecting the reality I had carried quietly for years. You are not invisible. You are seen. You are worthy. The engine started, low and steady, a comforting hum beneath the quiet of the night. As I backed out of the driveway, I thought about how long it had been since anyone had truly acknowledged my work, my efforts, or even my presence. This was more than applause. It was validation rooted in understanding. An understanding I realized could change the trajectory of a life. Driving home, I passed familiar streets, streetlights painting the road in soft yellow patterns. Normally, these roads felt monotonous, a reminder of ordinary days spent in ordinary routines. Tonight they felt transformed. Each familiar corner, each quiet stoplight, felt like a checkpoint I had crossed. Not just geographically but emotionally. I reflected on my family, scattered around the house I just left. I thought about the cousins who had measured my worth in smiles and service, the adults who had kept me at arm's length, and the children who had seen only the surface. And I realized something. The judgment that had once defined me held no more power. I had walked out head high not because others had changed but because I had. A text from Reeves lit up my phone as I reached a red light. A simple note. Glad you're safe. Think about the offer. You'll do well. I smiled, the corners of my lips lifting despite exhaustion. The message was professional, understated, yet it carried a weight that mattered far more than the polite applause or forced compliments I had endured all night. Here was someone who had not only seen me but offered a tangible next step, a recognition that extended beyond words. I thought about the clinic I worked at, the nights I had stayed late, the patients whose hands I had held, the moments when I had felt invisible even in the presence of gratitude. For years I had operated in silence, shaping others' experiences while rarely claiming my own. Tonight that silence had been broken, and the impact was immediate. It was empowering, frightening, and intoxicating all at once. By the time I turned onto my street, the city had grown quiet. The echo of the party faded behind me, replaced by the familiar calm of my neighborhood. Houses lined the street, lights glowing softly behind curtains, normalcy restored. But I was not the same. The recognition of the evening had shifted something fundamental. I was walking forward differently, no longer defined by what others expected of me, but by what I knew I had earned and what I had to offer. I parked my car and sat for a moment, staring out the windshield. The rain had stopped, leaving the world polished and reflective. In that reflection, I saw not just a woman who had endured neglect and subtle humiliation, but one who had claimed her own space, her own narrative. The card from Reeves remained in my purse, its edges worn from the nervous handling earlier. I pulled it out and traced his handwriting, feeling a sense of possibility stir. We need nurses who understand both medicine and loss. The kind who steady rooms. It wasn't a job offer in the conventional sense. It was an acknowledgement of my skills, my persistence, my resilience. And more than that, it was a validation of my humanity, the unseen work, the emotional labor, the quiet victories that had accumulated over years of dedication. I placed the card back in my purse and stepped out of the car, inhaling the cool night air. Each breath felt like reclamation, a declaration that I belonged to myself first and foremost. The night had been a crucible, testing not my ability to serve drinks or smile politely, but my capacity to recognize my own worth when others overlooked it. As I walked up my porch steps, I felt a sense of closure, not with my family, not with the room I had left behind, but within myself. Tonight had been more than recognition, it had been liberation. I had been seen, yes, but more importantly, I had claimed the right to stand tall regardless of who watched. Inside my house, I set down my purse and sank into the couch, letting the silence envelop me. The world outside was quiet, ordinary, yet I felt extraordinary, not because of accolades, but because of the subtle, profound shift that had taken place inside me. I thought about Ellie and the laughter we had shared, the small triumph of connecting with innocence untouched by judgment. I thought about Reeves and the quiet authority he had wielded, the way acknowledgement can create a bridge between loneliness and pride. I thought about the toast, the single word ma'am, and how it had changed everything. Not because it elevated me above anyone, but because it reflected the truth I had carried all along. Sleep came eventually, slow and steady, not the restless kind I was used to after nights of tension or disappointment. And in that sleep, I dreamed not of judgment, not of expectations, but of possibility, of rooms filled with respect, of work that mattered, and of myself walking forward, always with my head high. By morning, the memory of the party was already becoming a story I would carry quietly, a turning point tucked into the folds of ordinary life. I dressed for the day, made coffee, and looked into the mirror. The woman who looked back at me smiled, not for anyone else but for herself. And in that reflection I knew. The night had not only changed how others saw me, it had changed how I saw me. That alone was enough to walk forward with strength, with pride, and with unshakable resolve. The world outside was still waiting, and for the first time in a long time I was ready. The journey from invisibility to acknowledgement was not complete. It never truly ends, but I had crossed a threshold. Walking out with my head high wasn't about proving anything to the room I left behind. It was about reclaiming the narrative that had always been mine. And that reclamation, I realized, was the most profound form of revenge of all. Not vindictive or harsh, but quiet, steady, and irreversible. Tonight, the room would remember my name. But more importantly, I would never forget the power I held when I remembered it myself. And as the morning sun filtered through the blinds, I whispered to my reflection, I see you. I always have. The night was over, the party behind me, but the strength, the recognition, and the courage would follow me forever, shaping the days ahead.